In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the additional settings and features that are available in SharePoint document libraries. Let's go back to the document library we've configured to handle our accounting documents and our expense reports. And let's check out our library settings. Now, in our video on how to set up and manage content types, we briefly looked at this library settings page. We talked about the advanced settings where we can enable the management of content types. And we talked about adding various content types after that onto this library. In this video, we're going to explore some of the other features that are available here as well. So we'll start at the top here with our list name, description, and navigation. You see, if I wanted to rename this library to something else, I could. Maybe we want to call this company documents. And maybe I want to add or update my library description. Notice now my library is called Company Documents, not just Documents, and my description will appear anytime a description for this library is drawn on the user interface. Another feature you may be interested in when setting up and managing your document libraries is versioning. By default, versioning in SharePoint for an out-of-the-box document library manages just what are known as major versions, meaning every time I upload a new version of a document, i.e. a document with the same name as one that already exists, SharePoint is just going to create a new version, version 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. However, I do have the ability to enable what is known as major and minor versions. You'll sometimes see these referred to as publish and draft versions. If I select this option, instead of having just simple major versions, version 1, 2, 3, 4, I can now have minor versions as well, version 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, etc. And you can do some interesting things with these minor versions or draft versions. For example, notice that I choose this option, major and minor versions. I get some options presented around draft item security. Draft items are any version of a piece of content that does not end in .0. So 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 would all be major or published versions. However, version 1.1, 2.3, 3.7, these would all be minor or draft versions of an item. So draft item security asks who should be able to see any minor or draft versions in this document library. And notice I can specify any user who has access to this library or only those users with the ability to edit that item. And this can be a useful way to stage changes on a piece of content while you're working on it, but before you're ready to share it with the rest of the organization. For example, let's say we have our employee handbook in this company documents library. And version 1.0 of the company handbook exists for everyone in the company to see. But now that it's a new fiscal year, we want to go back and update some of the policies in the employee handbook. However, we don't want anybody to see the updates that we're making until all of those updates are complete. Some of the updates might not have been officially approved by management yet, and other updates might just be confusing or misleading if not viewed in the context of all the updates. In such a case, what I could do is set up major and minor versions and set my draft item security so only users who can edit items can see draft versions. What this means is, well, my HR team was working on version 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3 of the updated employee handbook, any employees outside of HR would only see version 1.0 until we published the next major version, 2.0. Another option you may be interested in is whether or not you want to require checkout. You'll see by default, this option is set to no. If I set this to yes, what happens is SharePoint will require me to check out a document anytime I want to make edits to it. And while that document is checked out to me, nobody else is able to come and make any edits. So this can be a great way for content owners to lock down a piece of content while they're making updates and not have to worry about anybody else being able to come in and step on their changes. However, it is very common in many organizations that implement this feature for folks to check out a document and forget to check that document back in when they're done editing it, thus leaving the document in a state where nobody else can do anything with it until that original checkout person checks it back in. So know that this option is available, but do be careful in how you implement it. And I would strongly recommend that you have some conversations around governance before enabling a feature like this. Another area in this library settings page you may be interested in are the permissions for your lists or document libraries. How do we add or remove people who have permission to this library? You can see right now this library is inheriting the same permissions as the rest of the overall site. And anybody in the Acme members group gets edit permission. Anybody in the owners group gets full control. And any in the visitors group just gets read-only permission. Well, what if I want this library to have slightly different permissions than the rest of the site? What if I want everybody in the company to be able to get to this site, but I don't want visitors to see my documents? Only owners and members should be able to see my documents. Well, that's easy to accomplish. I can use this option, stop inheriting permissions. And what this will now do is create a different set of permissions for this document library than the permission set that manages the overall site. Let me go ahead and remove the visitors group. Now, notice my library has unique permissions, and I've removed the visitors group. What this means is now anybody who was a visitor can still go to my site, but they will not be able to see anything in this document library. I've removed their permissions. If I want to check on permissions for a certain user, maybe I have a user who's complaining they don't have permissions to see anything in this document library. Well, that's very easy. I can use this check permissions button, put in the username, and see whether or not that user has access and how. So notice if I put in my own identity, I see that I have 2 levels of access to this library, both full control and edit, each given through a different group. If I wanted to grant permission specifically to a user or group, I could do that. Again, by putting in the name of the user and then specifying what permission level I want them to have: full control, design, edit, contribute, or simply read. Now, if I've done all of this in error, and I simply want to get back to the original permissions this library had, in other words, if I want to go back and secure this library the same as the rest of the overall site, well, I can undo all these changes just by selecting Delete Unique Permissions. As soon as I choose this option, I go back to inheriting the overall permissions of the site. And notice my Acme Visitors group has returned, restoring access to anybody in the Acme Visitors group to get to content in this library. So this has just been a quick tour of some of the features that are available in your list or library settings. There's a lot more that we haven't touched on, but these are really the features that you're going to spend most of your time as a library user or administrator working with. In our next video, we'll talk a little bit about some of the overall site settings that administrators may be interested in, what they do, why they're significant, and why you might want to use each one.